It's late May, around 9 at night, and the coastline at Cape Canaveral flashes bright orange, bright enough to be seen from miles inland. 320 feet of rocket, packed with 7 enormous methane engines, sitting on the pad for a test that was supposed to be completely, boringly routine. 6 days earlier, this rocket had finally been cleared to fly again. 6 days later, it was scattered in burning pieces across the Cape. So what the hell happened to Jeff Bezos' New Glenn? To understand why this one stings so badly, you have to rewind. Because New Glenn was never just another rocket. It was Blue Origin's entire comeback story. And for a very long time, a lot of very smart people doubted it would ever leave the ground at all. Now, this part genuinely surprised me when I dug into it. Jeff Bezos found Blue Origin all the way back in 2000, before Elon Musk had even started SpaceX. So picture the setup. The richest founder on the planet, the biggest head start in the entire modern space race, basically unlimited money, and for about 2 decades, almost nothing in orbit to show for it. Blue Origin even had a company motto for how it operated: Gradatim ferociter. That's Latin for step by step, ferociously. And the running joke across the whole industry was that Blue absolutely nailed the step-by-step part, and then somewhere along the way completely forgot about the ferociously. The rocket at the center of all this is New Glenn, named after John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth. Bezos pulled the covers off the design back in September 2016 with a confident plan to start launching by 2020. And then the delays began. 2020 quietly became 2021. 2021 slipped to 2022. 2022 turned into 2023. And the rocket didn't actually fly until January 2025, roughly 5 years late. So why the endless delay? A huge chunk of the blame lands on one stubborn piece of hardware: the engine. New Glenn runs on 7 engines called the BE-4, which is short for Blue Engine 4, and they burn liquid methane, basically the same stuff as the natural gas in your kitchen stove, mixed with liquid oxygen. Gorgeous on paper, an absolute nightmare to actually build. The BE-4 spent more than a decade in development and didn't fly on anything until 2024. And in the summer of 2023, one of these engines exploded about 10 seconds into a ground test, wrecking the test stand. If that already feels like foreshadowing, just hang on to it for a few minutes. While Blue Origin was stuck in slow motion, the consequences piled up. They lost out on a giant Space Force launch contract, a miss that company executives later admitted cost them billions in potential revenue. The rocket kept burning through Bezos' personal fortune, which he was funding by selling around $1 billion of Amazon stock every single year. And the culture inside the company got hammered in the press, with employees describing a place that was great at building shiny prototypes and terrible at actually shipping anything. Blue Origin was becoming the punchline of the new space race. The tortoise that forgot the part of the fable where the tortoise actually wins. Then in late 2023, Blue Origin made the single move that changed everything. They brought in a brand new CEO, a guy named Dave Limp, straight out of Amazon, where he'd run the teams behind Alexa, the Kindle, and the Echo. And Limp tells this great story about his job interview with Bezos, where he basically asked one blunt question: is Blue Origin a hobby or is it a business? Because in his own words, he didn't know how to run a hobby. That mindset hit the company like a shot of espresso. Limp said Blue Origin had been stuck in research mode for years, brilliant at building high-end prototypes and beautiful factories, but not actually a manufacturer that could crank out hardware and fly it. So he set himself 2 simple goals: launch New Glenn and dramatically ramp up engine production. And then he did something nobody at Blue Origin had managed in 20 years. He delivered. About 13 months after he took the job, the thing everyone said would never happen finally happened. On January 16th, 2025, New Glenn roared off the pad at Cape Canaveral for the very first time. And here's a detail I genuinely love. Blue Origin nicknames its boosters, and the name on this first one was, I'm not even kidding, quote, "So you're telling me there's a chance," quote. because no company in history had ever landed an orbital booster on its very first attempt, and Blue knew it. They were basically winking at the audience before the rocket even left the ground. And the launch itself? It worked. New Glenn climbed all the way to orbit, hit its target with almost surgical precision, and deployed its payload, a test platform called Blue Ring. After 20 years and several $billion, Blue Origin was finally, officially, an orbital rocket company. The only part that didn't go to plan was the landing. That giant first stage was supposed to come back down and touch down on a floating barge out in the Atlantic Ocean. Instead, the engines didn't relight cleanly on the way down, and the booster was lost somewhere over the water. But honestly, reaching orbit on Flight 1 was the win that actually mattered. The landing was the bonus round, and Blue Origin was about to absolutely nail it. Their second flight came in November 2025, and this one was carrying something genuinely cool. 2 NASA spacecraft, twin probes nicknamed Blue and Gold, heading all the way to Mars to study how the red planet lost its atmosphere billions of years ago. The booster on this flight had an even better name than the first one. Quote, "Never tell me the odds." Quote. And about 9 minutes after liftoff, that enormous booster came screaming back down through the sky, slowed itself with its own engines, and touched down perfectly upright on a landing barge sitting hundreds of miles out at sea in the Atlantic. The barge, by the way, is named Jacqueline, after Bezos' mother. So there's a nice little family detail buried in the middle of a rocket landing. It worked. Blue Origin had just become only the second company in the entire history of the human race, after SpaceX, to land a massive orbital-class booster and bring it home in one piece. After 2 solid decades of being the industry's favorite punchline, Blue Origin finally had its moment. And for a few glorious months, it really, truly looked like the comeback was real. Flight 3 in April of 2026 was supposed to be the victory lap, and in some ways it was the most impressive flight of all, because Blue Origin took that exact same booster, never tell me the odds, refurbished it, and flew the whole thing again. The first time a New Glenn first stage had ever been reused. And it landed, again, 2 for 2. This right here is the holy grail of modern rocketry, the reusability that makes SpaceX so absurdly cheap and so dominant. And Blue Origin had just pulled it off with the biggest booster they'd ever flown. But while every camera and every space fan on the internet was watching that beautiful booster landing, something was going very wrong way up at the top of the rocket. The upper stage, the part that actually carries the payload the rest of the way into orbit, sprung a leak. Super cold propellant, colder than just about anything found in nature, got somewhere it absolutely was not supposed to be, and it froze a hydraulic line solid. One of the engines couldn't steer properly, and the paying customer's satellite, a commercial spacecraft from a company called AST Spacemobile that beams cell signals straight to phones from orbit, got dropped into a useless orbit, a total loss. So now a pattern starts to form. The booster, the genuinely hard part, the part everyone obsessed over for a decade, kept working beautifully. It was everything else, the upper stage, the landing on Flight 1, the part that should have been the easy bit, that kept finding brand new ways to break. And if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. I dig into the messy, fascinating stories behind the new space race every single week. All right, back to it, because this is exactly where the whole thing comes apart. After that stranded satellite, regulators grounded New Glenn and handed Blue Origin a list of problems to fix before flying again. The company worked through them, and on May 22, 2026, New Glenn was officially cleared to return to flight. 6 days later, it was gone. On the night of May 28th, New Glenn was bolted to the pad for what is called a static fire test. That is a routine checkout where the rocket stays clamped to the ground while the engines fire for just a few seconds, purely to confirm everything is healthy before an actual launch. The next flight was supposed to go up barely a week later, carrying the first batch of Amazon's internet satellites. The 7 engines lit, and then the entire rocket erupted into a fireball big enough to light up the night sky for miles. Houses in nearby towns shook. In the days afterward, Blue Origin actually had to warn people that chunks of debris might wash up on the local beaches. By some miracle, nobody was hurt. But here's the part that really hurts. The pad it was sitting on, Launch Complex 36, wasn't just damaged. It was Blue Origin's only orbital launch pad, not their main one, their only one. Along with the rocket, the explosion took out the giant transporter structure that rolls the rocket out and stands it upright, plus surrounding pad equipment. In about 30 seconds, Blue Origin lost a rocket, a payload schedule, and the single piece of ground they had to launch from. And this is where one bad night turns into a genuinely enormous problem, because an almost unbelievable amount was riding on this one rocket. Start with Amazon. Bezos, of course, also founded Amazon, and Amazon is building a giant constellation of internet satellites called Amazon Leo, which is basically their direct answer to Elon Musk's Starlink. New Glenn was meant to be the workhorse hauling those satellites up to orbit, and the destroyed flight was supposed to be the first of around 24 planned launches for Amazon. That entire schedule just froze solid. And Amazon is racing a regulatory clock to get a huge number of those satellites into space, so every week of delay genuinely matters. Then there's the US military. Just over a year before the explosion, the Space Force selected Blue Origin as a national security launch provider in a deal worth $2.4 billion to fly some of America's most sensitive payloads. It's pretty hard to launch spy satellites and missile warning hardware when your one and only pad is a smoking crater. And then there's the big one, the moon. New Glenn is the rocket that's supposed to launch Blue Origin's lunar lander, called Blue Moon, as part of NASA's entire plan to put American astronauts back on the surface of the moon. And get this, just 2 days before the explosion, NASA had announced a fresh contract worth $188 million for Blue Origin to deliver 2 rovers to the moon's south pole. 2 days. The ink was barely dry when the rocket that's central to all of it went up in flames. Space policy experts were blunt about it, basically saying this throws a wrench into a moon timeline that was already shaky to begin with. And there's one more landmine hiding in the smoke. Those troublesome B-4 engines, they don't only power New Glenn, the same engines also power the Vulcan rocket built by another company, which flies critical missions for the Pentagon. So if the investigation ever points the finger at the engine itself, the problem doesn't stay with one rocket, it spreads to 2. So the obvious question is, how long until Blue Origin can actually fly again? And the honest answer is, nobody really knows, and that's the scary part. The closest comparison anyone in the industry points to is SpaceX, who blew up a rocket on the pad back in 2016 during a fueling operation. It took SpaceX well over a year to repair that pad and get back to flying. But here's the difference that really matters. When SpaceX lost a pad, they had other pads to fall back on. They simply moved their launches and kept going. Blue Origin has nowhere else to go. Until Launch Complex 36 is rebuilt from the ground up, every New Glenn that exists, and every New Glenn still being assembled in the factory, is stuck on the ground with nowhere to launch from. And the investigation into what actually caused the blast could take many months. As for the man whose fortune built all of this, Jeff Bezos kept his response short and calm. He confirmed everyone was safe, said the team was already hunting for the root cause, called it a very rough day, and promised they would rebuild whatever needed rebuilding and get back to flying because, in his words, it's worth it. And Elon Musk, watching his single biggest rival lose its only launch pad live on the internet, responded with just 5 words: "Most unfortunate, rockets are hard." And that's the genuinely wild thing about New Glenn. In the span of roughly 16 months, this one rocket went from finally reaching orbit, to landing a booster, to reusing that booster, to stranding a satellite, to blowing up its own launch pad. Triumph and disaster stacked right on top of each other. Spaceflight has never been clean. Pretty much every rocket program that ever made it to orbit got there by losing a few along the way. Blue Origin will almost certainly rebuild because Bezos has both the money and the sheer stubbornness to make it happen. What we don't know yet is what actually triggered that fireball, or how many months and how many customers it's going to cost a company that's already running behind in the race. The investigation is only just getting started, and the moment those answers come out, I'll break the whole thing down for you. So hit subscribe and stick around because this story is a long way from over.